Okay, so today we are looking at Joshua chapters 11 and 12. Now, I wonder, do you like a good walk? Perhaps you like to get out and see things, but what if that long walk went on for days, weeks, months, even years? I remember at school studying the Long March in China, led by Mao Zedong in the 1930s and 40s. It wasn't just a walk. They weren't just wandering around China. They were fighting battles against the government. And it went on for years. Now, that kind of long march is exhausting. You know, hardships make people want to give up. And when will this kind of march end? When will this kind of long walk come to a completion? Now, in Joshua's 11 and 12, we got lots of detail of some battles and very little of others. One of the battles is over in a day, but others go on for years. We get lists of defeated kings, but it's easy to miss the background of the situation. The Israelites have been wandering in the desert for 40 years. They've entered Canaan, but these two chapters cover a number of years. They're marching around the land defeating enemies. We got at the start the king of Hazor gathering together a coalition from all over Canaan, meeting north of Galilee. And the Israelites have been fighting in the south, miles away. That's where we start in our section. And the whole scenario is exhausting. There are hardships. But this long march, this big walk and march around Canaan, is the design of the Lord himself. He wants the Israelites to grow, to learn, to develop in their faith. Hopefully this morning we're going to see this, that God's obedient people experience God's faithfulness through God's victories in God's good time. And we're going to look at that by asking ourselves three questions. The first is this: how can I be sure of victory? How can I be sure of victory? When nations embark on wars, it's usually because they're sure they're going to win. That's why Russia invaded Ukraine. It's why Hitler invaded Poland. You don't start a war you think you will lose. Joshua and the army of Israel have taken a section of Canaan from Jericho to Gaza. Now then, hopefully this is going to work. I just want to show you this on the screen because it will hopefully make more sense. So, hopefully you can see this now, that we've got this whole area here that they've taken: Jericho, Ai, Bethel, across near to Gaza, at Gibeah, etc., etc. So that's the area they've taken. But there's this area here that's still to take, and this whole area up here, up north, going through Shiloh, Jezreel, up to the Sea of Galilee and Hazor. That's where the King Jabber, or whatever his name is. It's up here. Mount Hermon, as well as mentioned, is all the way up here near to Damascus. So hopefully that makes a bit more sense. There's whole areas still to take. And that's enemy land. And we've got Jabin, the king of Hazor, and he puts together a coalition of many cities to get together and defeat Israel. Now, Hazor on its own has a population of about 40,000 people. If you remember back, because you can't probably remember, but in comparison, Jericho was a much smaller than that. Ai was much smaller. So this is serious opposition. And that's just one of the cities, 40,000 people. They're well armed, they're well trained, they've got horses and chariots. It's a large force. This is not the kind of opponent you want to take on. The chances of winning are very low. It's an overwhelming enemy. It's a hopeless situation. Now, Israel have picked off a few small cities. They've defeated 5 kings and a few more, but this is much bigger. They're playing with the big boys, literally, because included in these battles that we're looking at this morning are the Anakites, people who are giants. The Anakites are the people the first group of spies saw more than 40 years before and were scared of. And because of that, the Israelites were too scared to take the land. But of course, that's not the whole story, because the writer of the book of Joshua follows his description of the enemy with the reality. The Lord is going to give Israel the victory. The Lord is going to give Israel the land. There's no doubt about it. And it happens. We read that they take the enemy by surprise at Merom, which is up in the hills. It's not the best place for chariots. And they destroy all the Anakites, the people the unbelieving spies had been scared of. Could they be sure of victory? Yes, they could. I want you to imagine something. There are two men squaring up for a fight. One is big and he's strong and his muscles are rippling. And the other is small and weak, puny. It's clear who's going to win the fight, isn't it? The big guy. But then up steps an even bigger guy. A big man who is going to fight for the weak man. He's bigger and stronger than the first big man. And this second big man, this one fighting for the weak man, wins. He wins the fight for the weak man. Can you be sure of victory? Yes, you can. Because it's the Lord who fights. Now, of course, in Britain, we're not going off fighting wars. In our church, we're not sizing up to people who aren't Christians and working out how to destroy them. We're not being superior to other people. The battles we fight are against the powers of Satan, against the forces of evil, which want us to doubt God, which want us to satisfy our lusts, who want us to think we're better than others. We're fighting against temptations which make us doubt God and his power. You and I can be sure of victory because the Lord wins. He gives you the victory. Jesus Christ himself won the victory over sin and death by dying on the cross. And he gives us that victory. By trusting in Jesus, we're made winners. But you might be thinking, I'm not winning. I'm not winning. But there's a question there. What victory are you trying to win? Are you trying to win victory over a particular sin? And see, maybe you're not winning because you're not prepared to stop sinning. You're not winning because you don't believe that Jesus has won. You know, perhaps the victory you're trying to win is your own personal battles. I want to succeed. Well, maybe you're not winning because you're too busy with flesh and blood enemies. You're not winning because you're too focused on this life and not the life to come. And perhaps the battles and the victories you're trying to win are so you have a good life and everything worked well. Well, you're not winning because you want everything in this world to be perfect when it never will be. You see, so often I think as Christians we're fighting the wrong battles. We're not fighting against Satan. We're not fighting against our sin. We're not fighting against temptation. But you see, you can be sure of victory over sin, over Satan, because Jesus has won. But do you believe it? The second question we're going to ask is this: can I trust God's faithfulness? Can I trust God's faithfulness? Now, in life, there's broken promises, aren't there? That's part of our lives. You know, politicians break their promises. Businesses don't follow through on what they say they're going to do. Healthcare professionals don't turn up for appointments. Family members let us down. See, who do you trust when everyone's a crook? But we do trust lots of things, don't we? You know, electricity and gas and water, we trust. The structures of our homes, what I'm in at the moment, and what you're in at the moment, we trust them. The furniture we use, the chairs we're sitting on, cash and bank cards when we buy things. Even the most cynical and least trusting person has to trust things in order to live. We rely on the faithfulness of someone else to do what they say they will do. You see, we do know what faithfulness is, even when promises have been broken and we've been hurt. In this section, we see God's faithfulness on display. And it's faithfulness that goes back centuries to God's promises to Abraham in Genesis 15, verse 18 to 21. This is what we read. On that day, the Lord made a covenant with Abraham and said, "To your descendants I give this land, from the Wadi of Egypt to the great river, the Euphrates, the land of the Kenites, Kenizzites, Cadmonites, Hittites, Perizzites, Rephaites, Amorites, Canaanites, Girgashites, and Jebusites." And God is fulfilling these promises in Joshua chapter 11 and 12. The land being described by the Lord is the one that is being given to the Israelites. Joshua and the people are seeing the fulfillment. They are experiencing God's faithfulness. He's faithful to them in the battles as they defeat different enemy kings and peoples. He's faithful to them in giving them the land that was promised. And this faithfulness is seen individually to Moses and Joshua. In Joshua 12, we're reminded of who Moses defeated in verses 2 to 6. And in verses 7 to 24, we're reminded of Joshua's conquests. But it's over a long period. You know, the battle we first read of in Joshua chapter 11, it happens overnight, but there's more battles that happen over a period of perhaps 7 years in the book of Joshua alone. Over 40 years for Moses. Over centuries going back to Abraham. God's faithfulness doesn't waver. But why is he faithful? Well, it's because it's his nature to be faithful. When he keeps promises, he keeps them. When he does stuff, he does it right. When he says he's with us, he is. He is always faithful. Sometimes there are things in life which are a hard slog. You know, clearing snow off paths this week, you know, off the drives, off car parks, getting to and from work, waiting for treatment, going up hills on a walk. A hard slog. Throughout this whole period of time in Joshua chapters 11 and 12, every day Joshua and the Israelites are going around Canaan, fighting battles, farming the land they've taken, experiencing the usual things of life: birth, illness, family, work. It's a hard slog, and God is faithful every day without fail. I want you to think about your days. I want you to think about the things that happen, the experiences you have, the trials you endure. God has been faithful in all of them. You might be tempted to think that he wasn't. You might reckon that the particular difficulty you experienced, the hard day you had to endure, the pain you carry, those things prove that God isn't faithful. It's not the abundant life you thought you'd get. But God's faithfulness isn't a magic pill which turns your world and my world into a lovely squishy bun. It's faithfulness over long stretches of time. Faithfulness through difficult situations. And you know, it is good like it is like that. Because how great would we think God's faithfulness is if everything is easy and fluffy? It wouldn't be impressive faithfulness, would it? If our lives were wonderful and we did everything we're supposed to do, what kind of faithfulness would we think that is? It's not that good, is it? It'd be expected, assumed. We'd never know how strong it is unless it was proved through troubles and trials. See, can you trust God's faithfulness? Yes, you can, because he's proved it in the lives of Joshua and the Israelites. He's proved it in your own life so far. And he proved it through raising Jesus from the dead, just as he promised. Our final question is this: what should I do? What should I do? 2 chapters of conquests, some described in great detail, others just mentioned in passing. Battles won under Moses and Joshua. What should I do? Should I go out and fight enemies and kill them? No. What we see here from Joshua and the Israelites and Moses is obedience. Obedience to what God says. You see it in chapter 11, verse 7, verse 9, and verse 15, verses 19 and 20. Joshua obeys what the Lord says. We might say, well, it was easy for Joshua. The Lord has given him direct verbal instructions. It's clear what he had to do. Just attack this city, kill that king, cut the tendons of those horses. It was easy. No, it wasn't. It was complicated for Joshua and the people. They're not a trained army. They're in a strange land with no permanent home. Everywhere they go, there are enemies who want to wipe them out. It's tough. And it's over a period of years. Years of being on the move. Years of danger. Years of uncertainty. Years of war. They didn't have it easy. No true believer in the God of the Bible has it easy. It was tough. It is tough. The Christian life is called a race, and a lot of people say it's a marathon, not a sprint. It takes a long time and takes lots of effort, but can often feel not a race on the flat, but a race over an obstacle course. What an obstacle course is. You go under nets, over gaps, swinging on ropes. You go up walls, you go through mud. It's tough. It takes lots of energy. But the key with an obstacle course is to keep going. Don't stop. You don't go back to the obstacle you've just gone through. You go forward. We keep going as Christians by knowing that God has won the victory, by trusting God's faithfulness, by obeying him. In these verses, we see that Joshua is the obedient servant of the Lord, just as Moses was. Joshua leads God's people to be faithful. And that's our starting point, because Jesus is the true and greater Joshua, who not only leads us to be faithful and obedient, but was obedient and faithful on our behalf. He lived the obedient and faithful life that we can't live. He fought and he won the battle over Satan, which means that by trusting Jesus, we are free to be faithful and obey. Just as the Israelites got off their backsides and obeyed the Lord's commands, we are free to obey the Lord, knowing that when we fail to obey, when we are unfaithful, we trust that we're accepted because of Jesus' faithfulness and obedience. And therefore, we can get up and obey again. The danger in these sections of the Bible is we think that we have to obey our way into God's books. We have to prove our faithfulness in order to be accepted by God. And sadly, that's where people like the Jehovah's Witnesses and Mormons and other sects have gone wrong. We can't obey our way into heaven. We are not faithful enough to be accepted by the Father, which is why the good news of Jesus is such good news. I can't make it on my own. I need Jesus. This week, the news has been dominated by the fires in California. And one of the things that has happened is that the authorities are giving clear directions to people to evacuate, severe and serious warnings that if they don't, they could die. But still, some were reluctant to leave. We've got a very serious warning in chapter 11 and verse 20. A chilling statement. We have the hearts of the Canaanite nations being hardened by God. And one of the things, if you've got the NIV and perhaps your translation, it says is this: it was the Lord himself who hardened their hearts to wage war against Israel, so that he might destroy them totally, exterminating them without mercy, as the Lord had commanded Moses. There's just one thing that's not quite right with that translation, and it's this. It mentions mercy, but the sense of it is not he does it without mercy. It's more that they cannot plead for grace. And that's slightly different, isn't it? The hearts of the Canaanite nations are hardened by God himself. They cannot plead for grace. It's a similar thing to what happened in Pharaoh in the book of Exodus. He got to the point where he could no longer plead for grace from God. And these Israelites have gone past the point of being forgiven. They've refused grace for so long, and we're talking a period of over 400 years, that the Lord ensures that they will never ask for it. If your response this morning is to do nothing, to sit on the fence, to think, oh, I'll wait and see, I need to warn you, there will come a point when you have refused grace for so long that God will harden your heart. And we might say, well, how is this fair? What gives God the right to do that? But you see, that's the wrong question, because why shouldn't he do that? Why should the creator of all things obey what you want when you want it? See, if you take one thing from this morning, let it be this: God's obedient people experience God's faithfulness through God's victories in God's good time. Don't harden your heart. Don't continue to refuse his grace. So as we finish this morning, are you an obedient Christian? Are you obeying him, following him? Do you know God's faithfulness? Do you know it for real? He's faithful to you in the good times and especially in the bad times. He's still faithful to you. And are you enjoying God's victories today and every day? Amen. We're going to sing our last song together. My heart is filled with thankfulness, and hopefully the words will be on the screen in a minute.